Someone want to help me find it in here? Somebody know where it is?
So it's 91, I think.
91? No, it's not 90. No, but it might be. That was 81. No. Yeah, it is. It's at the bottom of the page. Bought any glasses? Okay, this song we customarily sing for all the devotees that have left this world and returned to the spiritual sky. So today for Bhaktisiddhanta we sung in the morning, but because of more devotees being here, the devotees wanted me to sing it also. Yeyanilo prema jana Karina pracho Hello Prabhu Kota Dela
Jai
So it's a little contradictory. On one hand, we're celebrating the appearance day of the founder of Christianity, and on the other hand, we're celebrating the disappearance anniversary of Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We're celebrating his disappearance anniversary. Yeah, Prabhupada's spiritual master. So there's no real contradiction, appearance, disappearance. It's the same for the liberated soul or for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There's no physical appearance or physical departure. The soul's eternal, so the soul appears and the soul goes somewhere else. Appears somewhere else at its will. So there's no lamentation in that sense. So I wanted to do a little comparison between Christianity and the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. I thought that would be interesting. There's as I just mentioned, the appearance of Christ, and there's the disappearance of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. It's interesting to note that actually the date of Christ's appearance is disputed. In fact, it's very much established that it's not the actual date. It was in English they called a pagan holiday of the Roman Empire that was very prominent. It was the beginning of winter, and it was also a big ceremony to the sun god primarily. And so this is what the people did in that civilization for hundreds and hundreds of years. And at that time, Christianity was approximately 400 years old and had suffered a lot of controversy in the empire, but had gradually made headway to acceptance. And when it was accepted by the emperor, then they began to Christianize a lot of these pagan holidays. And so that's how Christmas became Christ's birthday. And instead of celebrating a holiday in appreciation of the sun god, they made that the appearance day of Christ. And the Christmas tree also has some connection to these things. So it's interesting how in our Krishna consciousness movement, we also Krishnas, different popular holidays like Christmas. We have a Christmas feast, we have a New Year's feast. Even though our particular Vaishnava calendar begins with the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. But we take the New Year and, we make it into a festival. We chant all night on the New Year's Eve. And then we have a big feast on New Year's Day. So we do that. And we see that the Christians are still very expert at doing this, because in India, they learn the languages, they take Indian music, and then they chant bhajans in glorification of Christ in his various pastimes. They also put Mary in a sari, even though she was from Hebrew civilization. And they take them out on a rocker cart. So to this day, you see, they still do the same thing to bring people to their religious persuasion, So it's interesting. We do something a little bit similar. We don't want to put the same type of emphasis on conversion. That's not our interest. Our interest is in people loving God, not in simply changing from this religious institution to that religious institution. We want people to understand the science of God, and that way, actually behave like a spiritual being, rather than, someone who is completely so much immersed in worldly politics and economic development and satisfaction of the senses, that we're constantly being disturbed by being in this material world because of our great attachment to it. When in reality, we should learn to be detached from it, understanding that we are a spiritual being, and we're meant to realize that. We're meant to move on from this place. So, another correlation is disciplic succession. Any mainstream Christian church has to come in a line of apostolic succession. That means from one of the original apostles or disciples of Christ, you have to be able to trace that church heritage to there. And of course, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Vedic culture, there has to be a disciplic succession. One has to be able to state who is one's guru, where is one getting their information from. If we're getting it from Vedic knowledge, then who has taught you the Siddhanta, or the conclusions of that Vedic knowledge? One has to be able to state their line of disciplic succession. In our International Society for Krishna Consciousness, we always say that A.C. Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Prabhupada is the founder and the Acharya. He founded the institution, and he is the epitome of the conduct that one is meant to exhibit in this institution. He's the Acharya, or the one who teaches by example. So in the same way, if we look at Christianity, we could see Christ like that. He's the founder, and he's the Acharya of that religion. However, there's basically two ways that people see Christ. The most prominent way, since about, sometime, after the 4th century, by the time that theologians worked things out, Christ became deified. And Christ became God. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Holy Ghost, like they say Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit, something like Paramatma. Father being God himself, and the Son being, from our perspective, would be the Jivatma, or the unlimited expansions of very small particles of God, who we could say are like his sons, many, many sons, but the Christ figure was understood to be a pure son, and most of the time they state the only son, although God, even a human being, can have more than one son. So then what to speak about God, he can have unlimited sons. So that's from our Vedic philosophy. But still, Jesus, as I was stating, is seen to be an incarnation of God, basically speaking. So if we would compare him to our International Society for Krishna Consciousness, then if Jesus is the founder and the acharya of Christianity, and Jesus is God, not just a son of God, then we would have to say Lord Chaitanya is our founder acharya, because Lord Chaitanya is God. He's an incarnation of God in Kali Yuga, and he's come to deliver people, to teach the science of God, and to give extraordinary mercy to people, to deliver us from our ignorance of ourself, our eternal self, not our physical self. We're all fairly familiar with our physical self, but our eternal self is what is lost. So Lord Chaitanya came to deliver us from this ignorance and to help us to understand our eternal self. On the other hand, if we see Jesus as the Son, just the Son, and there are some Christian sects that still see him like that, then Prabhupada is the founder acharya of ISKCON, which he is, even though Lord Chaitanya is the founder acharya of the Hare Krishna movement. Prabhupada is the founder acharya of the Hare Krishna movement in the Western world, and of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. But Prabhupada is not God. He's Jiva Tattva, but he's Guru Tattva. So the Guru is the representative of God. Just like the ambassador of a nation is the representative of that nation. And if you go to his place of business, or if you go to that government place, that embassy, it represents that nation. And if a person goes in there, then he's considered to be in that nation. Sometimes they go into an embassy and they plead for some sort of political asylum. And if the country accepts them, then that other country cannot take them out of there, because it's considered they have went to that country. And the ambassador represents the country, represents the president, represents the leadership of that country. So in the same way, the Guru represents God. He is God's empowered representative. If he wants to deliver somebody, he can deliver somebody by God's mercy. So then, if we see Jesus like that he's a Guru figure, then Prabhupada certainly is our Guru figure. He is the Guru figure of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. All the other Gurus, they have to teach according to Prabhupada's Siddhanta. Siddhanta meaning Prabhupada's conclusions of Vedic knowledge. And Prabhupada himself, because he is the Guru, he has to present those teachings according to his Guru, who passed away today. Not on this particular, this is his anniversary of leaving the world. So, Bhaktisiddhanta is an extraordinary being. He is the empowered devotee who took up the mission, actually, of his father, And it was his father who conceived this international society. It was his father and himself who gave the whole format. Format meaning, they gave all the instruction. They gave the manual. They gave the idea. They began carrying it out. But it was A.C. Bhaktisiddhanta Swami who actually did the legwork. It was he who marketed it. It was Prabhupada who actually took it around the world and established it around the world. So it's interesting, Prabhupada is their representative. In coming in a line of disciplic succession, then their representative is traced back to Lord Chaitanya. But Lord Chaitanya is God, and he didn't just appear and say, I am God, I am starting in a disciplic succession. Because he was teaching human beings, he played like a human being. And playing like a human being, he also accepted initiation into a line of disciplic succession. The line that he accepted initiation into is called the Madhva Sampradaya, coming from the Acharya Madhva. And Madhva, he took initiation into the disciplic succession coming from Vyasadeva. And Vyasadeva was initiated by Brahma. And Brahma, of course, appears from Vishnu. And Vishnu is God, is so independent that he did not require Lakshmi to beget Brahma, the original person in the universe, the engineer of the universe. But he simply procreated him on his own being. So that's Lord Chaitanya's disciplic succession. It's interesting that he took sannyas in this world in order to deliver people, because as a family person, people couldn't understand his teachings because his teachings were too esoteric, and they took it that he was being too sentimental with Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan primarily. That Krishna was, that he was too devoted to the loving associates of Krishna in Vrindavan. And they didn't take it seriously. So in order to help them to understand the seriousness of it, he completely renounced the world. Completely renounced the world. Gave up his family. His mother was already widowed, and he was the only son. His wife was young, and it was his second wife. But in order for the world to understand and to learn, he had to renounce everything. And in doing that, he took initiation into the line of disciplic succession coming from Sankaracharya, because that was the most prominent line of sannyasis at that time. Although you did have the Ramanuja Sampradaya there, they mainly operated in South India. And this was all going on in Bengal and Orissa, Bengal primarily. And so the Sankarites were more prominent there and in Varanasi. And so people, many of the scholars in Navadvip, in the course of being educated to teach Vedic literature, you had to learn the language it was written in. So they would go to Varanasi to learn Sanskrit, because the most prominent scholars of Sanskrit were teaching in Varanasi, and they were generally sannyasis, not always sannyasis, but the sannyas line of disciplic succession was very prominent in Varanasi. So Lord Chaitanya actually took initiation in that line of disciplic succession. And people, by the status quo, were forced to pay him respect. Just like the status quo. We may not like Donald Trump, but if Donald Trump comes here because he's the president, you cannot disrespect him because he's the president. And if you threaten him, you go to jail. Now, I may threaten Krishna Shraya with some words, but I can't be put in jail because he's an ordinary human being, I'm an ordinary human being, and I haven't done anything but speak some ill words. And the police may say, y'all have to keep your distance, and if he bothers you too much, you can file this sort of civil court thing so that he doesn't come around you. But it's not a crime. But you can't do that with the president. The Secret Service will show up at your doorstep. You'll have all kinds of problems. So, it's the status quo. You have to respect the president. So similarly, at that time in India, and even today to a large extent, everyone will show respect to a sannyasi. And you won't dare to think that their teachings are just sentimental. Now, another sannyasi may speak like that and challenge one to a debate, which happened to Lord Chaitanya in his discipleship succession. All those followers of Sankaracharya, they thought, you're in our discipleship succession, so why are you sentimental like the ladies at the temple, just singing and dancing? Now, of course, they don't usually dance at the temple, but they sing bhajan. And so Lord Chaitanya had to debate with them and teach them. The way he did this is very unique because they were all devotees of the Lord's all-pervasive Brahman. They were devoted to the all-pervasive effulgence of the Lord that exists everywhere. So that was their goal in life, to become liberated by again merging into the Brahma Jyoti, merging into the effulgence of the Lord. So Lord Chaitanya sat down to debate with them in the shoe room of their particular place where they stayed, because that was his natural humility. He simply sat down in the shoe room. But when they looked at him, he looked like 1,000 suns. And they were completely awed. He had achieved what they wanted. He had already achieved the effulgence of spirit of Brahman to the extent that he looked like 1,000 suns. And so they approached him in a humble way and began to question him. And he delivered them from their misunderstanding of Vedanta, that the effulgence of God is not the epitome of God. It is not the perfection of Vedic understanding. We have to understand where that effulgence is coming from. And that makes the Leela of the Lord more prominent than just the impersonal Jyoti of God. The Leela of the Lord is, we can use the word higher, is on a higher transcendental plane than just the Jyoti. The Jyoti is transcendental, but the form of the Lord and the Leela of the Lord are even more prominent. So, there's not a lot of teaching in our Christian religion concerning the Leela of the Lord. Mainly there's the Leela of Jesus. And to a large extent, there's many years where that's not understood. The last 3 years of his preaching mission is written about, but very little before that, up until the age of 12, then there's a big space from 12 to 30, then the last 3 years. It's interesting that the founder Acharya Lord Chaitanya, if we say Lord Chaitanya is the founder of Acharya of ISKCON, Lord Chaitanya preached to everyone in India, which were primarily Hindu people and Muslim people. And he preached to everyone and made everyone devotees. But he didn't preach outside of India. Jesus didn't preach to the Gentiles. He only preached to the Jewish people. His apostles preached to the Gentiles, especially Paul. And when Christ had left the world, there were a lot of sects of Christianity. They could be divided into two primary ones. Those that remained faithful to the Jewish religion, and they were headed by the brother of Jesus, James. And they were pacifists, and they were vegetarians. I debate with one devotee who became a devotee here. He actually didn't become a devotee here. He sort of initiated here. He was initiated in Dallas, but this is where he met his guru, and he took so much instruction from here. But he always just beats on the desk and says, Jesus had to be a meat eater because Jews are meat eaters and everybody eats meat on the Passover. There's no question Jesus wasn't a meat eater. And you try to tell him, well, there were, even though it was a very small minority, there were Jewish sects that were vegetarian and pacifist. They're there. I mean, scholars document it. There's the Ebionites, there's the Essenes, and many people feel that Jesus was an Essene. So, but he won't hear it. He can't, there's that fallacy in his argument that he can't even hear the other person's side of an argument. So he defeats it only by challenging the integrity of your argument, that he completely ignores it. But it's a fact that there were these nonviolent Jesus sects. There was, before Jesus, there were these other Jewish groups. And certainly there was the early Christians under Jesus' brother James were pacifists and vegetarian. But Paul's group primarily was not. And they were often at odds, although they agreed on the divinity of Jesus. They disagreed about how to follow Jesus. Like Jesus, James' group didn't really preach to the Gentiles. It was a Jewish sect. And there were many Jewish sects. Gradually they faded out. The Christians completely separated from them. Well, one reason was because, as everyone knows, the Roman Empire eventually, drove all the Jewish people out of Israel, practically speaking, for politics, political reasons. They created revolution, and the Romans had enough of it, and they destroyed the temple, and they destroyed Jerusalem, and they chased all the Jews out of the area. And so the Christians separated themselves from it because it was the Jews who were being more persecuted than them. Gradually, they were also persecuted. And when they attained strength in the Roman Empire and eventually became a more prominent group, then they persecuted those that had persecuted them. And some of them that didn't persecute them because they wasn't all in Rome. They were all over Europe. So anyhow, so if Jesus is the founder Acharya of Christianity, then, Lord Chaitanya and Prabhupada is the founder Acharya of the International Society of Krishna Consciousness. And the teachings and those who disseminate the teachings both had to come in line of disciplic succession. You had to be able to show your line of disciplic succession. So that's as far as I got in assimilating my thoughts. I wanted to talk about this, but I went over and visited our friend Talavana, who is suffering from Parkinson's disease, and he's doing much better. Doing much better now that he's on medicine. And that took up most of my time, and this is all I really had a chance to get together. But it's an interesting topic to compare, Christianity and Krishna consciousness, especially on Christmas Day. We celebrate the birth of the founder Acharya of Christianity. And again, there are two groups. There are those that believe that he was a pacifist. I mean, after all, it's quite well known that he said to turn the other cheek if your enemy slaps you on one of them. And he's also, which is extremely controversial. Most people don't believe it, but there are some that do, that he was a vegetarian. And of course we know Lord Chaitanya was a vegetarian and was certainly another pacifist, basically teaching love of God. He didn't interfere with the Kshatriyas or the rulers or the politics that goes on in that world. Because he was teaching people ultimately to renounce the world and just devote themselves to God. But he didn't demand everyone to become a sannyasi. The family people, he just encouraged everybody to chant God's names. In fact, that was his philosophy. Whether you live in the forest, whether you're renounced, whether you're not renounced, whether you live at home, simply chant Hare Krishna and devote yourself to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that makes our life perfect. That's Lord Chaitanya's teachings. And we could say that Jesus' teaching, the primary teaching, because he didn't ignore the Jewish law. Many people think that he got away with the Jewish law and he created a new covenant or a new law. And they say that the primary teaching of that law is to love God with all one's heart, mind, and soul. But you can never find that Jesus completely ignored the law of God or the Jewish laws, which are many. And especially the 10 that Moses gave on the plaque that is controversial if you put it up in a public place in America. But out of those 10, 3 were most prominent. And out of the most prominent one was to love God with all one's heart, mind, and soul. And that's basically the same thing Lord Chaitanya is teaching. And Srila Prabhupada, to love God with all of our body, mind, and soul. And we can learn to do that, we can get the experience of that. We need a spiritual experience to do this stuff. Without the spiritual experience, then it's just an academic thing that, how many times can you hear it? All right, I know that. But if you get an experience from it, then you don't only know it, but you own it. That, we don't just say love of God, but you experience love of God. We experience some love for Krishna. One will become, Krishna's devotee. Then people do all sorts of things. You walk around singing, even softly. I remember this one man that used to come to the temple in New Orleans. I was a little bit intrigued by him. He was an ordinary man. He was a retired man, older man. But under his breath, he was always chanting, he was always singing a bhajan. Especially he liked singing Jai Radha Madhava. He was a really nice man. So the devotees will do things like that when one has an experience of love of God. There's always this rasa, or this melodious, intriguing taste that goes on with them and their deity, the form of God that they love. So as I started this, I was saying that there's not a lot known in our Christianity about the Leela, or the pastimes of the Lord. in his different forms, other than Jesus' Leela and then whatever we found in the Old Testament. With the New Testament is Jesus' Leela. But the Old Testament, is the Jewish Leela of the Jewish people, being, conquered by Babylon, being conquered by Egypt, and being enslaved, and then being released, and, having King Solomon, King David, and, it's that Leela, but it's not the heavenly Leela. What goes on in the spiritual realm, that is not so much disclosed. That, what's disclosed is to be faithful and to have faith in the Supreme God, which, again, that's what we do in Krishna consciousness. We have faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But there's a lot of information about that Supreme Personality of Godhead and how he can expand into different forms to incarnate into this world just to help people. We have the famous Dasa Avatar, those 10 expansions of Vishnu that expand into this world to help people. Like, devotees always pray to Lord Nrsingadev because Lord Nrsingadev helps people. He helps people overcome evil. So they pray to Lord Nrsingadev because he helps us overcome evil. If he was evil, we certainly wouldn't pray to him. We'd run from him. So it's interesting that there's so much known about the form of God that God can take different forms for incarnating. And that's how we see that there's a difference between Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya has a golden hue and Krishna has a bluish hue. But there's no difference between Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. There's one mental difference. Krishna is just Krishna. But Lord Chaitanya is Krishna, but he's also Krishna's consort, combined. Because it's Krishna wanting to understand how much his consort loves him. So it's a very unique incarnation. And that's why he's teaching everybody just to love Krishna. Whereas when Krishna was here, Krishna was telling people to follow Dharma. And he said the highest Dharma is simply to surrender to me, to surrender to God. And basically he said to do that by mamana, think of me, mamana, bhava my bhakto, by being my devotee, majajimam, worship me, and namaskuru, pay respect, obeisances to me. And by doing that, I will protect you. But as Lord Chaitanya, he was teaching us more of a spontaneous love for God like we would see amongst the cowherd gentlemen and the cowherd ladies in Vrindavan. They all loved Krishna. Not only his mothers and his aunts, but all the ladies in Vrindavan loved Krishna. And all the gentlemen loved Krishna. He was like the hometown hero. And they didn't even think of him as God. They just thought of him as their friend, their son, their nephew. They just were completely intrigued with him with spontaneous love. They loved Vishnu as God. Krishna's expansion is Vishnu as God. Even in this world, Vishnu is God. Krishna doesn't have to do what God does. God breathes out universes. God begets Brahma. God is the super soul in everyone's heart, having to watch what we do and to try to inspire us to do things that are right. But Krishna doesn't have to do any of that. He just playing with all the people in Vrindavan, having a good time. And if he wants to do something more city-like, he's doing that in Dwarka. And if he wants to do it as a prince, he does it in Mathura. But he's always just enjoying these pastimes without having to play like God or be God. He just does that through his expansion of Vishnu. So it's not that we worship many gods, they're all the same God. We just know more about the Lord's Leela. his pastimes. God has pastimes just like Jesus had a pastime of delivering everybody. Just have faith in him and follow what he says, and he'll give us salvation from all of our sins. So in the same way, just by remembering Krishna and being his devotee, Krishna will protect us. Lord Chaitanya was teaching us how to do that in a more spontaneous way. To love Krishna. We hear about Krishna's pastimes, and they purify the heart. It is said, people have a very hard time in the world today with all sorts of sinful things. One of those things is pornography. People become so sexually habituated that they're constantly being disturbed in inappropriate ways. But if people can walk in and bow down to Krishna and start reading Prabhupada's English Krishna book, which is basically the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that describes Krishna's Leelas when he appeared on earth. And if they read about the loving affairs between Krishna and all of the cowherd ladies in Vrindavan, the benediction is that one becomes free from lust. Just by associating with Krishna, one becomes free from lust. Nowadays, they're using every means possible to try to free people from lust, and it's impossible. And to the extent that they lock up people and say that it's impossible to change such a person. But Krishna can do all sorts of things, including delivering the most fallen. And he does it just by giving some sort of, it's called a Jnana Sukriti, some sort of special mercy, whereby one somehow ever hears about Krishna. Maybe at first they just hear some devotees out doing Sankirtan, the great sacrifice of the age, chanting Krishna's names so that everybody can hear. And maybe that's all they do, is they just hear it. And then later, there's so many stories about how people get a Krishna book and they don't even like it. But something happens in their life and they just read it because they don't have nothing else they want to read, and their mind's so upset that they just look at it anyway. And it has an amazing effect. So Krishna can deliver us just by hearing about him. That's the power of God. Just by hearing about him, people become delivered from all sorts of inauspicious, bad karma. That's the power of God. So it's not that God has just one incarnation to deliver the world. He has unlimited incarnations to deliver the world. And he's delivering the world through this Hare Krishna movement as well. It's a market it's very wonderful to have as many things there as possible delivering people. And it's certainly no place for monopoly, because people are too diverse. And what appeals to one person may not appeal to another. So, let there be as many devotees as possible, helping other people become devotees. Because it's only by becoming a devotee that we can escape our sinful reactions. People, we have to understand how much people are going to suffer in the world. Why does the world have so many problems? Well, the devotees know. It's because they can't stop killing things. We kill so many animals, it's ridiculous. Do we not think that there's some sort of bad karma for that? So how can we change that? Impossible. But God can do the impossible, not us. We can't. We won't change it through politics or anything else. Religious ministry, they'll just shoo us away. But Krishna can do those things. So we just go on chanting, we go on distributing Krishna book, we go on distributing prasadam, And gradually the world changes to a better place, naturally, organically. Not through all sorts of suffering and misery. If there's suffering and misery, it's because that's being brought on by the other thing, not by the Krishna consciousness movement. Krishna consciousness movement is just a nice movement meant to deliver the world through hearing and chanting about Krishna and taking Krishna's prasad. There's nothing wrong with that in any constitution. Maybe some of these fundamentalist constitutions may not be allowed for one reason or another, you know, but at least in America and other places of the world where there's some sort of freedom of speech and association and worship, then, you know, there's no problem with that. So, I'm going to stop here because it's already, what did that clock say? I can't even read it, 1:30, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so 1:30, that's long enough. We can get ready to take feast now. We can take some of that Krishna prasad, and that will strengthen our devotional kripa. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.